This lecture discusses the basic structure of a data science project. A typical data science project will be structured in a few different phases that I'll talk about separately in this lecture. So there's roughly 5 different phases that we can think about in a data science project. The first phase is the most important phase, and that's the phase where you ask the question and you specify, what is it that you're interested in learning from data. Now, specifying the question and kind of refining it over time is really important because it will ultimately guide the data that you obtain and the type of analysis that you do. Part of specifying the question is also determining the type of question that you're going to be asking. So there are roughly 6 types of questions that you can ask, going from kind of descriptive to exploratory to inferential to causal to predictive and mechanistic. And so figuring out what type of question you're asking and what exactly the question is really influential, and so you should spend a lot of time thinking about this. Once you've kind of figured out what your question is, then typically you'll get some data. Now, either you'll already have the data, or you'll have to go out and get it somewhere, or maybe someone will provide it to you, but the data will come to you. And then the next phase will be exploratory data analysis. So this is the second part. And there are 2 main goals to exploratory data analysis. The first is you want to know if the data that you have is suitable for answering the question that you have. And so this will depend on a variety of factors, depending on kind of very basic things like, is there enough data? Are there too many missing values? Things like that. So more fundamental ones like, are you missing certain variables, or do you need to collect more data to get those variables, etc. The second goal of exploratory data analysis is to start to develop a sketch of the solution. And so if the data are appropriate for answering your question, you can start using it to kind of sketch out what the answer might be to get a sense of kind of what it will look like. This can be done without any formal modeling or any kind of statistical testing or things like that, just to get a good picture of what it might be. The next stage, the third stage, is formal modeling. So if your sketch kind of works out, you've got the right data, and it seems appropriate to move on, the formal modeling phase is a way to kind of specifically write down what questions you're asking, what parameters you're trying to estimate. And it also provides a framework for challenging your results. So just because you've come up with an answer in the exploratory data analysis phase doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be the right answer. And you need to be able to challenge that your results through a variety of approaches, whether it's sensitivity analyses or other types of analyses. So challenging your model and developing a formal framework is really important to making sure that you can develop robust evidence for answering your question. The next phase is interpretation. So once you've done your analysis, your formal modeling, you want to think about how to interpret your results. And there are a variety of things to think about in the interpretation phase of a data science project. The first is to kind of think about how your results jive with kind of what you expected to find when you were first asking the question. And also you want to think about the totality of the evidence that you developed. At this point, you've probably done many different analyses, you've probably fit in many different models, and so you have many different bits of information to think about. And part of the interpretation phase is to kind of assemble all that information, to weigh the different pieces of evidence so that you know kind of which are more reliable or which are more important than others, and to get a sense of the totality of the evidence with respect to kind of answering the question. The last phase is the communication phase. And so any data science project that is successful will want to communicate its findings to some sort of audience. Now that audience may be internal to your organization, and maybe external, and maybe to a large audience, or even just a few people. But communicating your findings is an essential part of data science. Because it informs the data analysis process and it translates your findings into action. So, and that's the kind of the last part, which is not a formal part of a data science project necessarily, but often there will be some decision that needs to be made or some action that needs to be taken. And the data science project will have been conducted in support of making a decision or taking an action. So that last phase will depend on more than just the results of the data science or the data analysis, but may require inputs from many other different parts of an organization or from other stakeholders. So ultimately, if a decision is made, the data analysis that was done will inform that decision and will support, and the evidence that was collected will support that decision. So these are roughly the 5 phases of a data science project. There's the question, there's exploratory data analysis, there's formal modeling, there's interpretation, and there's communication. Okay. Now, There is another approach that can be taken, it's very often taken in data science project, and that is to really start with the data and to start with kind of exploratory data analysis. So often there will be a data set available, but it won't be immediately clear kind of what the data set will be useful for. So it can be useful to kind of do some exploratory data analysis, to look at the data, to summarize it a little bit, make some plots, and see what's there, and to generate some interesting questions based on the data. So this is sometimes called hypothesis generating, because it kind of produces questions that were not already there. Once you've produced the questions that you want to ask based on your initial kind of exploratory data analysis, it may be useful to kind of get more data or other data to kind of do an exploratory data analysis that's specific to your question now, and then continue with the formal modeling, interpretation, and communication. One thing that you have to be wary of is to do the exploratory data analysis in one data set, develop the question, and then go back to the same data set and pretend like you hadn't done the exploratory data analysis before, and come at it with, say, a fresh question that goes on to the rest of the stages. This could often be a recipe for kind of for bias in your analysis, because the question and the results were derived from the same data set. So it's important to be careful about doing that and to try to obtain other data when you're using the data to generate the questions in the first place. Okay, so this is the kind of secondary approach to data science that can be very useful and can often result in many interesting questions that are kind of generated from the data. So data science projects have a variety of phases, and it's important to kind of understand which phase you're in so that you can know kind of how to progress and how to move forward with any data science project.